Hamish de Bretton-Gordon is a retired British Army colonel, former commander of NATO's and UK's chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear reaction troops. Welcome to our program, Colonel Hamish.
Thank you very much for having me.
US President Donald Trump had a phone call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. However, Putin didn't make any kind of compromise here. Didn't make any kind of concessions and just proposed to continue this endless negotiations with Ukrainians. Is Vladimir Putin overplaying his hand right now?
Well, I think there are another number of things. That extraordinary telephone call yesterday, well over 2 hours, and they didn't seem to discuss, very much of substance. I think it is very clear that President Putin has absolutely no interest in peace at the moment. And I suppose when you look at the position he's in, that's not difficult to understand. Already 1 million Russian soldiers have been killed on the battlefield, over 4,000 tanks. His economy is in desperate straits. And Putin has been telling the Russians that he would subjugate Ukraine for many years now. So he knows that if he doesn't realize what he's promised the Russian people, he is finished. And also, the position of President Trump and his lead advisors has until recently you can see why Putin has felt that he can push forward his apparent reasons or the way that he will accept a ceasefire seem completely unreasonable and absolutely something that President Zelensky and I'm sure the Ukrainian people can't accept. He said before any thought of a ceasefire, Ukrainian forces will have to withdraw out of the 4 oblasts which Russia attacked, and also disengage with the West. These seem to be completely unacceptable. But I think it really underwrites that at the moment Putin has no interest in peace. The Americans, President Trump seems to be losing interest in this dreadful war. But I think it is reassuring, hopefully, to the Ukraine people that at least the European countries, led by Britain and France, are showing much more resolve now, and hopefully, their military strength will be enough to persuade Putin that he needs to sue for peace. And just one final piece on this, we've discussed it before. My view, when Putin looked west on the 24th of February 2022, he didn't see a conventional deterrence in Europe that concerned him. At least now, when he looks west, he will see the European armies rearming, and what the coalition of the willing in Europe must also demonstrate to Putin that they are prepared to use that military power if at all, if necessary, even if the Americans withdraw to their side of the Atlantic. That may be the trigger that will get the Russians to the negotiation table. But I'm afraid at the moment, it doesn't seem very likely that they have any desire for peace in the short term.
But don't you think that Putin could lose this opportunity to have this way out from the war by playing games with Donald Trump, by also provoking Trump's anger towards Russia, towards Putin? Do you think that he could lose this opportunity for a way out from this war by delaying ceasefire talks and by deciding to continue this war against Ukraine, but not to agree with ceasefire proposal?
Well, that is certainly possible. But I think one of the challenges we have at the moment is very difficult to read President Trump. He does seem to ebb and flow and change his views at a fairly regular basis. And his Vice President, J.D. Vance, was talking about potentially walking away, and Trump almost suggesting that he's getting bored of the whole thing. And to me, there are two options. The first option, as you suggest, Trump could get incredibly or over frustrated with Putin and decide to throw the American military might in support of Ukraine. Now, if they did that, absolutely, Putin could lose absolutely everything he's got. Conversely, Trump could just walk away and leave Europe to it, which is why I think it's so important that European militaries really step up here, because the European military might, I think, is powerful enough to push the Russians back too. Let us hope that Putin realizes this, and let us hope that Trump decides to go all in behind Ukraine rather than turn a blind eye, because I think Trump is clever enough, or hopefully his closest advisors are clever enough to realize that a wider war in Europe will have a profound effect on America, on the economy. And I suppose the ultimate piece to this is, Trump has told us what a great deal maker he is, and how he always does a deal. And is he really going to walk away from the chance to do what would be the greatest deal in his life? Let's hope he's not.
Also, US Vice President J.D. Vance recently said, quote, Putin doesn't seem to quite know how to get out of the war. Is he right? And what is your opinion on this interesting statement?
Well, that's certainly J.D. Vance's opinion. And I think there is an element of truth to this, because, as we've discussed earlier, Putin has not achieved the aims that he set out, but he is responsible for a million Russian casualties. He's responsible for crashing the Russian economy. The rank and file, the ordinary people in Russia, struggle to have enough money to eat, let alone anything else. And I expect even the oligarchs that Putin surrounds himself with are getting frustrated that they can't visit all their castles and yachts in Europe. So I think the pressure on Putin is very much building up. And the added pressure of the oil price falling, Russia is absolutely dependent on selling oil to the likes of the Chinese and Indians to keep their armament factories going. But America and Saudi Arabia have decided that they want the oil price below $50 a barrel. If this happens, very, very quickly, Russia is going to run out of money, and they can't make ammunition on thin air. So I think when you look at all that, J.D. Vance's comments there, do have a resonance, because if there is any sort of show, I expect, within the Kremlin that Putin is capitulating in any way, then that will be the end of him, and there'll be somebody else to take over. Putin, having ruled Russia for 25 years, it seems clear that he absolutely wants to keep going. But he needs to, I expect, for his internal consumption, find a peace deal or a ceasefire that doesn't condemn him to the gallows, as it were. But at the moment, it's quite difficult to see how that is. Although I suppose what we hear in the West through news reports like yours and through social media is the truth. We're very well aware that the people of Russia get a very distorted view of the truth from the state-controlled media. So it may well be that J.D. Vance is right here, and it may well be that Trump and Vance can come up with a way that Putin can come to the peace negotiation table and can get a ceasefire, which doesn't look like an abject failure to his close supporters and the Russian people.
Does it mean that Vladimir Putin is also a victim of his own decisions, of his own game? Because Russian state media has been saying to people, has been convincing, persuading Russians that they should capture the whole 4 Ukrainian regions. More than 1 million Russian soldiers were killed or wounded in this war, and now it seems like Vladimir Putin is also a victim of his own decisions, of his own war objectives and of his own promise, which were made right after the beginning of full-scale invasion to capture the whole of Ukraine, but to capture also these 4 regions?
Absolutely. It seems 24th of February 2022 seems a long time ago, but it was Putin's special military operation that was only going to last a few days, perhaps a few weeks. That's what he had told the Russian people. He would then own Ukraine. We're well over 3 years later, and that is far, far from what he promised his people. Russia has managed to illegally capture 20% of the ground area of Ukraine at the cost, as you said, millions of lives. But one cannot see how any way Putin can dress this up as some sort of success. We know that he does, or the state controls the media, and people only get fed what they like. But as you mentioned, even some of the Russian media that is very close to Putin is questioning what is happening in Ukraine, is questioning the leadership, and of course the economy itself. Even people in Moscow are really feeling the pinch. Interest rates are through the roof, inflation is through the roof, and if countries like India and China decide to buy cheap oil elsewhere, which they're likely to do as the oil price keeps going, then he is very, very quickly going to run out of money. And he is really, the potential for Putin is pretty dire. But what he needs to do is to get to the peace negotiation table and to stop the fighting so that we can move forward. His original aim to subjugate Ukraine seems very, very far away, even in the last 12 months, as we've discussed before. The front lines, the contact line has moved very, very little. And it seems unlikely that Russia has the forces, the world forces that are trained well enough to be able to make anything more than very small gains. So we're in a point of stalemate, I think, on the battlefield. And really, I agree with Trump in this particular case that it's very much in Putin's hands to create a ceasefire and peace deal. And as he previously mentioned, if he doesn't come forward soon, then the Americans might run out of patience. So we shall see what happens in the next few days. Hopefully, Putin will see sense and we will get a negotiation, which, I mean, at the end of the conversation yesterday, President Trump did say that the negotiations would start immediately. And it's not clear whether that has actually happened.
Also, despite Russia's problems on the ground, Putin still believes that his forces can break through Ukrainian defenses and capture 4 Ukrainian regions fully by the end of this year, according to Bloomberg sources in Kremlin and according to people familiar with Putin's thinking about this war. Why does Putin still believe that he can achieve such unrealistic aims?
Well, I think it's what we call wishful thinking. He's got to think that, otherwise he knows that he's finished. But all that we see on the front line, most of the Russian conscripts are very poorly trained and don't have the training to make big inroads. We've seen recently in the last week or so lots of talk about Russian motorbike troops making gains on the front line. But again, a lot of this is sort of propaganda and disinformation coming out of Russian websites where a few motorcycles have managed to get through Ukraine lines, but 90% of these motorcycle troops are killed in the action. So it would appear that the Russians don't have tanks and drones arrayed in a position where they could make advances. And as you suggest, his desire to take the whole of the 4 oblasts by the end of this year seem very remote. In fact, completely inconceivable. And the sooner he realizes that, I think the better for everybody. and let's hope that President Trump keeps leaning into this, and also, as important, that the coalition of the willing, the European militaries, also lean into this as well, so that Putin is clear. If he doesn't sue for a ceasefire and peace now, he could actually lose everything that he's promised his people for the last 3 years.
Also, according to Bloomberg, there are some military commanders in Russia's Ministry of Defense there, and they are skeptical of the possibility of Russian army capturing the 4 regions of Ukraine by the end of this year. Moreover, they can't even cross the Dnipro River to capture the city of Kherson or the city of Zaporizhia. How can you assess such unrealistic objective from a military point of view? Because there is a big obstacle on their way, the Dnipro River.
Again, I think this is all wishful thinking coming out of the Kremlin. And as has been reported, there are some senior voices in the Kremlin and in Moscow who are now voicing their concerns that these are completely unrealistic aspirations. Now, this is pretty remarkable. We haven't heard anything like this coming out of Moscow in the last 3 years. And if people now feel prepared to suggest that Putin's got it wrong, then that gives us hope, actually, that people close to Putin are realizing that they need to change tack, and hopefully that change of tack is to the peace negotiation table. I think the other thing that's clear with the death of a Russian general in the last couple of weeks in Moscow, which is the second or third senior Russian general who has been killed. People in Moscow, people in the Kremlin are also realizing that they're fearing for their own safety, and that the selfishness with some of the senior Russian leaders is more likely to get them to voice their concerns to Putin than anything else. But any aspiration I think Putin has to take the 4 oblasts in the next few months are completely unrealistic. And the quicker he realizes that, the better for everybody, I believe.
Also, according to the Washington Post has conducted many interviews with former and current Russian soldiers and military commanders, and some Russian soldiers complaining about the corruption among Russian commanders, businessmen, and some of the soldiers also accused Russia's military command and big business of opposing a peace deal because they are benefiting from the wartime spending, from Putin's wartime spending. What is your take on that? Do you feel that there are also could be some people in the military, in the Russian business who oppose peace deal because they are not happy to stop receiving this big wartime spending, not happy to stop managing this big Russian funds?
Unfortunately, it might seem incongruous to us here in the West, in sort of democratic world, but that is probably very, very likely. It is clear that some of Putin's close aides, some of the elite in Russia do own the factories, which are now generating billions and billions of rubles and dollars worth of profit for those who own them. And those rich people, these are the oligarchs who've got their super yachts in the Mediterranean, ski chalets in Europe, etc., and their private jets. They are making a fortune out of this war, and it's quite believable that they want things to carry on so they can keep on making money. It's a mark of these sort of people how sort of selfish they are. But I think it's well been known that the Russian state has been corrupt for years, and when you have a tyrannical leader like Putin and an autocratic way of leadership, this tends to happen. Again, it's incongruous to us, but I am sure that those people who are making a fortune are the strongest voices behind Putin, telling him that he should keep going, because it's not them who are having to fight at the front line. It's not their children, I expect, who are fighting and dying in the Donbass and elsewhere on the front line. So unfortunately, I expect there is a lot of truth in the rumours that those factory owners are keen to see the war going on so they can keep lining their pockets with more and more rubles and gold, no doubt.
Also, according to the Washington Post, Vladimir Putin is really in difficult situation, as you previously mentioned, because an unconvincing victory, Russian unconvincing victory, could bubble up into the kind of discontent that fuels Wagner force mutiny in 2023. So Putin is afraid of accepting a peace deal which would not be convincing, would not be seen as a convincing Russia's victory. What is your take on that?
Well, I think it's interesting that he sacked some senior generals recently. I tend to forget about Prigozhin, who was leader of the Wagner group, who did lead the rebellion against the Russians, against the Russian state, as it were. And of course, we know that his aeroplane then blew up in the middle of the sky on its way out of Moscow. So I think there are two sides to this. I'm sure there are people like Prigozhin in and around Moscow and the Kremlin who are deeply concerned of what's going on and are no doubt plotting to take over. And I'm sure there are other politicians, in inverted commas, in the Kremlin who would like to take over from Putin as well. But we know Putin runs a very tight ship. He's paranoid about his own security. His own security guards even have to get checked before they come and see him. And I personally believe he didn't go to Istanbul to the meeting that he'd arranged last week with President Zelensky because he was terrified that he would be taken out in Istanbul, either by Secret Service agents or even arrested. Let's not forget he is an indicted war criminal at the International Criminal Court. So lots of things I think going on at the moment, and Putin. I think the Russian army itself is reaching its culminating point. In other words, running out of steam, and I think Putin is probably sitting very uncomfortably in the Kremlin at the moment, realizing that he's not going to achieve his objectives. The population are realizing, quite what a devastating thing he's done to the Russian country and the Russian people, and no doubt there will be a number of Russian generals and Russian politicians who are thinking about removing him and taking up the mantle themselves. We shall see. But let's hope that pressure does get Putin to the negotiation table before it's too late for the people who've got to fight in the front line at the moment, and too late for Putin himself.
But you believe that there could be some people inside Russia who would like to remove Putin from power, for example, in case if he fails in these negotiations, if he does not accept any kind of a ceasefire deal, or if he overplays his hand by pretending to like to have a peace deal, but by delaying this deal, just forcing Trump to walk away from these negotiations, leaving Russia in really bad condition, with really bad situation with this war going on.
I am sure there are people in Russia and in Moscow who are looking at what's going on at the moment, who are deeply dissatisfied with the way that Putin is running things, and are deeply dissatisfied the way the country's going, the economy's going, and everything else. And are probably hopeful, like the rest of the world is, that there will be a ceasefire and some sort of peace deal. I am sure that if Putin continues to ignore pleas for a ceasefire, continues to ignore the US president and the European leaders, then he is getting himself into an even more difficult position. And although we don't have a great sight of what's going on in Moscow because of the way that the state control the media and social media, I think one would be fairly confident that there are people ready to take over from Putin if he trips up much more. And let's hope that will be enough to get him to this negotiation table sooner rather than later.
And from your perspective, do you feel that Putin can just continue his war despite the negative effects on Russian economy? Can he just move forward with his war and decline all offers received from US President Trump, from European leaders? What could be with Putin's regime in such case if he just decides to continue his war without the possibility of achieving his maximalist aims, like just decide to continue his endless and war without any kind of a good objective achieved in the nearest future?
Well, the fact that he's kept going for 3 years really does worry us all, I think. His Achilles heel, I mean, his big weakness is going to be his ability to generate foreign income. And at the moment, virtually all of that comes from oil. But the fact that the price of oil is falling rapidly and the Americans and Saudis are pushing it below $50 a barrel gives one confidence that he can't keep going. At $50 a barrel, Russia, on its current spending on defense, is going to run out of money pretty quickly. And that will be the precursor, I expect, for Putin either having to negotiate a ceasefire or somebody in Russia replacing Putin.
Thank you, Colonel Hamish, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you very much for having me. Glory to Ukraine.
Героям слава. Thank you very much.